Our testimony, Ronnie and Patricia Bishop. Today I'd like to tell you about how we ended up moving to Tennessee. Ronnie and our children were living in southern Ohio at the time and working in northern Kentucky. We drove 140 miles each day round trip to work and back. In Ohio, we lived in a subdivision where the houses were as thick as they could stick. Of course, being a house full of musicians and singers, we were always having music practice. This sound of gospel music would fill the air, and it riled the devil. Our neighbors continued to call the police on us. One particular evening, it was dark. A knock came on the door. I answered it to find two policemen standing there. They asked if I was the homeowner. I said, "Yes, I am." They said, "Well, ma'am, we have been standing out on the sidewalk listening for about an hour now. You guys are great." I said, "Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it." He then said, "But your neighbors are repeatedly calling the station and reporting you. So you must stop what you're doing because not everyone likes the kind of music you're playing." He said, "If we have to come back out, we will have to take the homeowner into custody." This was in 2003. This let Ronnie and I know that if we were going to keep working for Jesus, we would have to move. We began to pray about it and asked the Lord where He would have us to go. Both of us heard Tennessee, but both of us thought, wouldn't Florida be nice, or maybe Wyoming? We decided to take a trip to check out Florida. We stayed a week and knew that this was not where God was telling us to go. We looked into Wyoming and found that unless you had already had your living made, there was no work there. We said, okay, if this is God and He wants us to go to Tennessee, then He's going to have to do the following or we can't go. We prayed and said, "Lord, you must find us work in Tennessee before we can move. We have to have a job waiting on us. And when you find us work, they must give us 2 weeks to be able to move there before starting work. And you have to find us a place to live where we can practice music and not get the police called on us." I'm not sure in either of our hearts how much we really wanted to uproot and leave everything we had behind. All of our friends, our family, our church contacts, our jobs, everything that we had and knew was there in Ohio. At this point, Ronnie and I had gone into business for ourselves as painting contractors. We felt like the Lord wanted us to leave the job in Kentucky. Ronnie had worked there 20 years, or maybe over 20. I had only worked there a little over a year. And that was where we were driving 140 miles round trip each day just to go to work and back. And we had also previously owned a children's consignment shop, and we had sold that. So now we were in business as painting contractors and worked for ourselves. Well, Ronnie had done this for probably 30 years prior to that as side work. So, we were both good painters. We both loved people, and God blessed us. And we had lined up way ahead of us. We had signed contracts where we had already gone and give estimates on the work. The people hired us. We had a signed contract and dates when we would start these jobs. And we had them well in advance so that we didn't have to worry about, an income coming in. But here we were praying about were we supposed to go to Tennessee. So we weren't so worried about God moving us to Tennessee anytime soon. We weren't desperate, but we knew that there was something in the makings. The police were always being called. We couldn't practice music. All of these things were happening. So shortly after we prayed and gave God all the specifics of what we needed in order to move, if that was indeed Him that we were hearing, I began looking on the internet at the local newspaper in Tennessee for employment. Not thinking much about it, I applied for work for both Ronnie and I. After I applied for jobs in Tennessee, it was just crazy. Every contract that we held for work in our painting business within just a couple of days of one another, every last one of them called for various reasons and canceled all of our contracts. We had never seen anything like it. It seemed every door slammed in our faces all at once. It was just a few weeks later, we got a call for an interview in Tennessee. We looked at each other and said, "So, do we go to the interview or not?" We decided to go. We drove all the way down to Tennessee, got up in the wee hours of the morning so that we could arrive at this, I think it was like 9 or 10 a.m. interview time. Folks, they hired us right on the spot. And before Ronnie or I, either one, could say to them that we must have 2 weeks before we can start this job, because they had told us, how busy it was, how desperate they were, that they needed people and they needed them now. Before we could say anything to them, they looked at us and they said, "Now we're going to give you 2 weeks before you have to start your first day." So there we were. It's like we looked at each other and we knew that 2 of the specifics that we had given to God had already come to pass if He wanted us to move to Tennessee. Now the hard part. Where were we going to find a place to live that we could practice music, secure it, all in one day, and get back to Ohio and start packing an entire lifetime and home and get back to Tennessee, unpack, and do all of this stuff in 2 weeks? Well, to make this story short, because that'll be a testimony in itself how this came to pass. It was nothing short of a miracle. But God led Ronnie and I straight to a place that was for rent. It was secluded on over 119 acres, and 54 acres of it was mowed. We couldn't possibly bother anyone with our music, and we paid the first month's rent, security deposit, and we set up that the electric would be turned on in 2 weeks when we would arrive to move in. Everything to the last detail that we had asked God to bring to pass in order for us to move to Tennessee and know that it was His will was laid out in front of us as smooth as butter. Or was it? Being a mother and still having the 2 youngest children living at home with us, they traveled with us, evangelizing and singing, and I was just brokenhearted. I realized that we were getting ready to move to Tennessee, and our daughter Megan was going to come with us. But our son, Jordan, who was also the bass player for our family singing group when we went out and evangelized and sang, said that he wasn't going to leave Ohio. And my oldest daughter, Holly, was married and had our first grandson, Samuel, and they would also be staying in Ohio. So you can imagine, I wanted to obey God. I wanted to do what He wanted, but my heart was just broken and torn, leaving my children behind and my grandchild. Well, we stopped to get a quick sandwich just before getting on the interstate to head back to Ohio to pack up our things. By this time, I was crying hard, thinking of the children and grandbaby that we'd be leaving more than 350 miles behind. Ronnie reached over and grabbed my hand in the van to comfort me as he drove with me sobbing. I know he was praying for me and would have loved to say, "It's okay, honey, we'll just stay in Ohio." But we had both witnessed how God had moved according to everything that we had asked him to do if he wanted us to move to Tennessee. I know Ronnie's heart was torn. Just after Ronnie took me by the hand, and before we could even get on the interstate, our cell phone rang. It was our son Jordan calling from Ohio. I told him that we had got the job and rented a place to live. And before I could say anything else, Jordan interrupted me and said, "Mama, I've been thinking, and I wanted to call you and tell you not to worry. I've decided that I, too, will move to Tennessee with you and Dad and Megan." I could barely believe what I was hearing. Jordan had just received a promotion where he worked and a major pay raise, and he was going to leave everything behind and come to Tennessee with us and have to start over and look for work himself. But praise be unto our God, for now the two children that had never left home were going to come with us, and we would be able to remain a family and continue to work for the Lord. When we got back to Ohio and actually started to pack, it began to hit me that I was leaving behind the oldest daughter and grandbaby. I was so grieved in my heart. I thought I was going to die. One night, while sound asleep, I was awakened by a man standing by my bed. Now you know that if you woke up in the middle of the night and there was a man standing beside your bed looking at you, you're going to scream and try to get away or have a heart attack or something. But I was not afraid and had complete peace. This man was dressed in street clothes and wore a golf-type hat. He lifted his hand and pointed to me and said, "Holly will be with you at the appointed time." And then he vanished. I could only cry and went back to sleep to rejoice when I woke up and could share the good news. I believe this was a messenger from God sent to me to comfort me and give me peace about going to Tennessee and it being the will of God. I know you want to know what happened with that. Well, Holly's husband kept saying that there was absolutely no way in this world, in this lifetime, that he would ever move to Tennessee. All of his people lived right around where they were living in Ohio, and he said he would never move here. Well, they had been down to visit us, and on their way back home, her husband looked over at Holly, who was crying, leaving her mom and everything, and he had tears well up in his eyes and said, "God has changed my heart and mind. We are going to move to Tennessee." So 18 months after we had moved here, all of my children and grandbaby lived within 5 or so miles of one another. Praise Jesus. This is only the beginning of all the things the Lord did. He showed us many miracles as well. I can't go into every detail or this video would have to be classified a movie, but I will touch on a few. There was 4 of us who needed to work, and we had only one vehicle. God gave Ronnie and I a job together, and we had a boss that said we could come and go as we needed to transport the kids to and from work. Have you ever heard of such a thing? So with one vehicle, we were able to pick up the children, take them to work, go back and get them, take them back home, and do our job, and never get in trouble, and or ever docked and pay. And God had got every last one of us a job within rock throwing distance from each other. We could actually stand out front of the businesses we worked for and see the other businesses. And all of our jobs at that time were less than 2 miles from our house. And in Tennessee, everything's a country mile. So that in itself was another miracle. But one day I got real discouraged and down. Things weren't going the way I thought they should. And I got to thinking about going back to Ohio. I went outside by myself and sat on the porch step and started talking to God. The more I thought of things, the angrier I got. Next thing I know, and I don't advise this for anybody to do this, but I've always been honest with God, and if I was mad, I would tell him I was mad. That's just how I am. And I said, "What? Have you brought us here to forsake us? Nothing is what I was expecting. We're out here all alone. We don't know anybody and nothing is happening." Once again I said, "Lord, here's a rose bush that we brought from Ohio and transplanted here in Tennessee, and it's dead." And I reached over and snapped a branch off of it, and it was brittle. I mean, it was dead, clear down to the ball, that sets just above the ground of the roots. And I said, "If this is where we're supposed to be and you haven't forsaken us, then you bring that rose bush back to life and show me that we're where we're supposed to be and you haven't forsaken us, and the blessings from you, from God, will be and are on us." At that moment, the Lord began to speak to me, and he said, "I have brought you here and secluded you to get religion out of you and to remake you. I not only will bring the rose bush back to life, but when you see the frost, it will still bloom." Of course, I cried and then went back into the house. It was weeks later, and Ronnie came looking for me and said, Patty, come. You have to come and see." I went outside, and the once dead rose bush was alive, with green, shiny, beautiful leaves all over it and buds. I would like to add that this rose bush had the biggest, most beautiful blooms that I had ever seen. They were deep red and velvety, and that year, not only did the rose bush live and continue to bloom when the frost came, but it also had big, beautiful red blooms that were stunning when they were covered with snow that year. Praise and glory to God. I can see that it will take many videos to complete this testimony of our life since we have come to Tennessee. Miracle after miracle has taken place, and we give God all the glory, honor, and praise. If it be the Lord's will, I will post more at another time. In closing, I would like to encourage you to trust Jesus and don't doubt him. The time we are now living in is more crucial than ever to know his voice, follow him, and obey his exact instructions to you. He will never leave you nor fail you. May Jesus bless you. Much love to all. Ronnie and Patty.